So you've come to the multilingual learning strategies for STEM. This is the first in what will be a series of professional development workshops over the course of the next year and even longer as part of a new project with the College of Education. My name is Jay Well. I am the Associate Director of the SMILE program and Precollege Programs. And I will let the other presenters introduce themselves.
Great, thanks, Jay. Hey, everybody, I'm Corey Buxton, and I'm a professor of science education at OSU. And I just got here 2 years ago. I came from Georgia. I was a K-12 teacher for 7 years, both in middle school and high school. And now I've been doing teacher ed work for 20 years somehow. I'm super excited to be part of the SMILE team now and working on this professional development effort. And one of the areas that I think about a lot is the language of science, and how, as science teachers, what is our role as teachers of that language? And one of the things I always try to say to science teachers is that we all have to be language teachers as well, because no one else can teach the language of science. Your language arts colleagues can't teach the language of science. Only those of us with a science background can think about, can help our students understand the language of science. So I've done projects for a number of years helping science teachers think about the intersections of language, culture, and knowledge building. So how do we help our students see themselves as science learners, as successful science learners? How do we help them think about their language as appropriate and useful for learning science? How do we help them think about the experiences, their lived experiences in and out of school, lifelong, life-wide? How do we help them see those as tools to be science learners? And how do we help them put the pieces of knowledge together? We give students kind of unintentionally a lot of bits and pieces and ask them to do a lot of the synthesizing work. And I've always argued there's things we could do to help them synthesize that knowledge a little better. So I say all that as an introduction to what is an introduction. I would like to take about 10 minutes with you all and talk a little bit about the language of science and how I think about it. But really, I would like to hear from you all about how you use language. We all use language every day, of course, in our science teaching. And so I'm really more interested in the breakout sessions where we'll get to sort of hear from you, your experiences, and what you're already doing with language and what questions and challenges you have, so that we can over time tailor our professional learning to really meet your needs around this area. But I do think it's helpful to share just a little bit of the background about how I think about the language of science to prompt that conversation. All right. So the project that I'm just starting here is called LaCuKnoS, which stands for Language, Culture, and Knowledge Building Through Science. So you hear this acronym LaCuKnoS, hopefully off and on, and maybe a little more and more as we go. This is a National Science Foundation funded project building on prior work that myself and others have done, but it's really about supporting teachers in Oregon in thinking about the intersection of these three topics: the language of science, cultural connections, and cumulative knowledge building. Next slide, Jay. So we know that there's a number of challenges and opportunities as science teachers that we're facing even before COVID happened. Particularly, we know that our student demographics are changing nationally, certainly statewide. We're teaching more and more students from backgrounds that differ from our own in more and more ways, and how can we successfully do that? We know that science, sort of the standards have changed, and the vision of science education has changed. What we think it means to be a good science learner continues to evolve, and we need to help our students think about that. And we know that sort of the academic and occupational pathways that we're preparing students for continue to evolve. What school looks like changes and changes and changes, and what the workplace looks like changes. And so how can we as science teachers, what's our role? Like, we only have a limited number of hours in the day, limited contact with our students. There's a lot here, right? But what can we do to help our students think about the challenges, help prepare them for the world that they're going to live in, which obviously is going to continue to look different from the world that we have lived in. So we're sort of at an intersection of these challenges, and then layer COVID and remote learning on top of that. Next slide. So In this LaCuKnoS project, sort of here's where we're starting. So you're really at the ground floor of a new initiative. And here are sort of the questions that are guiding some of our initial work. So what is the role of language development in science learning? What does it mean to say that we need to focus on language as science teachers? And similarly, what's the role of culture and culturally sustaining practices in science learning? How do we connect science to our students, to their communities, to their families, to their lived experiences? And what are the contexts? So how do we build spaces where students can use and leverage their linguistic and cultural resources to make meaning? So that's one of the things that I really want to think with you all in the breakout session. What are you already doing? How do you create your classroom spaces, like pre-COVID, now in COVID, post-COVID, to support students' building on their linguistic resources and building and making cultural connections? Next slide. So how do we want to think about language development, and what does it mean to say that language development can support science meaning making? We talk a lot about meaning making in science. It's all over the new standard. It's all over all the new writing about science. Is epistemology, meaning making, epistemic practices. You'll see and hear this a lot when you read NGSS stuff. So what does it mean? What's the role of language in science meaning making? So for me, I'm really interested in how we use language to build relationships. And that means relationships between ideas and relationships between people. So I talk a lot about using language to build epistemic relationships. So that's like connecting ideas, but also we use language to connect we use language to connect with knowledge, but we also use language to connect with other knowers. So these social relationships are really important. And I'm convinced that for our students to be successful, for all of our students to be successful in science, we need to help them think about how they represent what they know about science, but also who they are as science people. And I see those things as really equally important. And we tend to focus a lot in elementary. I see this sort of trend as we go from elementary through middle and high school. We focus more and more on the knowledge, sort of decontextualized from the people. Elementary teachers have this natural sort of desire to connect kids, right? And by high school, sometimes we forget that that's part of the job. And so I'm really interested in what you already do and how we can think about all of us doing a better job of helping students make those epistemic connections to science, but also the social connections. And how that relates to language is this idea that language is used for specific purposes, right? Language is a tool that we use to help us to convince other people of whatever we're trying to communicate, right? So that's the purpose of language that needs to drive how we use language. There's not good and bad language. There's just good and bad language for different purposes. If your language isn't accomplishing what you want it to do, then that was not the best language choice to make. It doesn't mean that language was bad. It just means it didn't serve your needs. So I spend a lot of time thinking with teachers about how do we help our students understand this, that we always make language choices. We're like producers and consumers of language, and those choices we make do things for us. And we can get smarter about using language in ways that help us do what we want to do. All right, next slide. So one more slide to help us think about language, and then we are going to get into breakout rooms. So this idea of using language to support science meaning making. Oops. Sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. This idea of linguistic modes, right? So one strategy that we use and we're trying to build in this work is the idea that there's different modes of language. So what do I mean by modes of language? So when we build a model, we are communicating through a kinesthetic way of building a model, right? If we're arguing in our lab groups and we're like debating with our peers about why something happened, that is a very different mode of communication than then we have to write up a lab report or something formal to turn into our teacher. So there are these very different ways we need to learn to communicate scientifically, and they require really different language skills. And we can make that more explicit, right? Make that sort of meaning more explicit for students so they can understand that they are making language choices when they're negotiating with peers that calls for one kind of language, but when they're trying to answer your question from the teacher, that's a different type of language. And when they have to write it up in the end, that's yet another type of language. And we tend to privilege in science certain types, certain modes of language, like receptive note-taking or sort of producing certain formal types of language. And kids come to think of that being the language of science. But really, we can use all kinds of language for science meaning making. It just depends on what the space we're in and what our goals are. All right, so that is just really the high level overview of some of the ways that I've been thinking about what it means to use language for science meaning making. And now we would like to put ourselves into breakout rooms by sort of grade level bands and talk a little bit more about, the next slide has our prompts on it, I guess. So in these groups, these are the questions that we'd like to ask you. Sort of, what do you expect your students to do with language as science learners? So like, how do you think about language in your own science classroom, and particularly the language you expect of your students? And then how do you learn about your students' interests and experiences? What do you already do that can help make those connections to what your students already know and the science that you are wanting to teach them? So those are going to be the topics of our discussion when we go to breakouts. I'll turn it back over to Jay to help us organize how we're going to do that.
So I am assigning the breakout rooms right now. And again, we're going to do this in a grade band in order, but I wanted to give, there'll be 3 different breakouts, and Corey will be with the middle school group. I'll be with the high school group, and Barbara will be with the elementary school group. And I want to give Barbara a chance to introduce herself.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I'll make it short. I'm a doctoral student in the Department of Education at OSU. It's my 2nd year in the program. And before, I was a science teacher in Austria for over 10 years. And then I moved to the States and worked as a special education teacher. And so I'm excited to get started with the breakout rooms.
So just a second here. I'm having to move a couple people around. Let me make sure. So, okay. Yes, I think we have the breakout rooms. We'll be in these rooms for 15 minutes. And we'll open the rooms now. We'll see you there.
Thanks, Jay.
Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had a wonderful breakout. I think everybody is back now. I look carefully. Yes, everybody is now back.
Awesome. So we had a great conversation in our room. I hope the rest of you did too. The next thing I want to do for the next 10 minutes or so is share one example of a model activity that we have used sometimes to demonstrate some of the language practices that we work with teachers on. And this is actually a lesson that was co-developed with some Georgia middle school, 8th grade middle school teachers, on the Cartesian diver. Some of you may know the Cartesian diver. This is a very old science demonstration. It's a way to demonstrate buoyancy, to think about sinking and floating, to think about pressure. And this is way more fun in a workshop to give everybody the materials and to do it. Unfortunately, in Zoom world, we can't do that. So a few of us have versions of it that we're going to demonstrate. Some of you may know this, but for those of you who don't know the Cartesian diver, it basically, you've got an empty bottle of water. It's got to be a plastic bottle that you can squeeze. And then there's lots of ways to make a diver. The version that I make, and it's a little hard to see, but I take a plastic pipette and just sort of cut off the long part. And so I've just basically got like a little squeeze thing, and I wrap a paper clip or a piece of wire around it to give it some weight. And the idea is you want to have the diver so that it can float under normal conditions, and then kind of your discrepant event or your anchor phenomenon, or whatever you want to call it, is you put the Cartesian diver in your bottle of water and put the top on, and it floats just fine. And then you squeeze the bottle and observe closely what happens. And of course, you probably won't be able to see this too clearly, but I would ask students first, often to make a hypothesis. I want to show you the demonstration, and then we'll look at the lesson. And Jay is linking the link to the lesson in the chat, so if you want to go to that. But basically, what the students observe is when you squeeze the bottle, the diver sinks to the bottom of the bottle, and when you release the bottle, when you release the squeeze, the diver floats back up. And if you use colored water like I did, and you may not be able to see it on your screen, but I asked the students, you know, do you see the green liquid inside coming out? And if so, when? And what they will observe is it doesn't come out when you squeeze the bottle. When the diver sinks, there's no green water coming out. And then when you release the bottle, you will see a little green, or whatever your color water is, a little plume, kind of like an octopus or a squid shooting a jet of ink. You'll see a little discharge of the colored water into the bottle. And if they observe closely, that's a kind of observation. It's easy to see that the diver goes up and down. It's a little harder to see the water coming in and out. And what you can also, if you observe very closely, the air bubble that is trapped in the diver, as you squeeze, it constricts, right? The pressure is causing that air bubble to contract, and that's actually what is making the diver sink. And when you release the bottle, that air bubble grows, expands, and you can see that's what makes it float. So that is sort of the demonstration part. And then I want to show you, I don't know, so this is one model. Maybe Barbara actually has another model of the diver that she can show you while we're doing demonstration.
Yeah, again, it's a diver made out of, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a diver made out of a straw and paper clips. Just fold them together and you build kind of a straw diver. And then you have it in your bottle and you squeeze your bottle and it goes down and it goes up. It's the same explanation, but it's a different use of material.
Same principle. And I love that there are many different models. If you Google, there's many different models from things you can buy that are very nice, like hand blown. The one in the picture here is a hand blown glass diver. So you can do everything from the fancy to the very, very basic. This is an activity that's been around for a very long time as a demonstration of buoyancy. But I want to show what we've done with this demonstration within the context of making it a middle school lesson with some of these language features embedded. So I don't know, Jay, if you can show the activity handout. And again, this is linked in, the PDF is linked in the chat. All right, so you can find this on the link later if you want to, but just to highlight, within sort of the lesson model, the lesson framework that we developed, all of our lessons start with what we call a language booster. And a language booster is a short, hopefully high interest little story that connects the science topic to something that perhaps kids have experienced or at least sort of seen on TV or something. So most people have seen a submarine in a movie or have some idea of a submarine as something that goes up and down in the water. And of course, submarines work on the same principle. And so the language booster sort of describes the idea of buoyancy, but using the example of how a submarine goes up and down. And what you'll notice about the language booster is it's meant to be kind of middle school language level, not super high, not super low, not be too long, but it introduces some key ideas and some key terms like buoyancy and mass and compressed and density. So it's introducing vocabulary, but in an embedded context. Rather than starting off with, here's your vocabulary words we're going to use, here's the definitions, it's using those words in the context of a little story, which we found in our research actually allows the kids to get a quicker and deeper sort of understanding of those words. And our language boosters always end with a partner, sort of a think, pair, share, asking students to turn to a partner, to talk about something first, and then to do a little bit of writing. So we're very big on pushing writing, but we don't do writing without an opportunity to talk about it first. And there's a lot of good reasons why that is sort of a good practice, that writing about science is really important, but can be a challenge for many students if they don't have time to think about what they want to write first. So all of our lessons start with these kind of language boosters and an opportunity to sort of introduce some key ideas before getting into the actual investigation. And then if you scroll through, then we have sort of more typically a discussion of the actual investigation you're going to do, the materials that you'll use, and the procedure. Then another thing that you'll see in our lessons is that there are embedded opportunities to sort of pause and do either writing or drawing. And we do a lot of multimodal, right? Because these modalities are important. So far what you're seeing is only writing. So you're following the procedure and then asked to think about why. But then we're going to do some drawing, right? So draw and write in the chart below, both sort of the squeezed and the unsqueezed. So some students will just do a picture, some students will do a labeled diagram, and we're going to push students to give us multimodal together. So to give us a drawing, but to give us some labels or some text to go along with it. But it's very important from our perspective that throughout the activity, there's opportunities for students to pause and either do some writing or do some drawing, and often doing it with a partner. That's quite important. Keep going, and then we have more sort of thinking and discussing questions focused on sort of explaining. So of course, a lot of, as with all in GSS, we're doing a lot of explanation, we're doing a lot of modeling, we're doing a lot of argumentation, building on all those practices. I will say that these model lessons that we developed with teachers in Georgia, Georgia is not an NGSS state. And so these are not, our initial lessons are not fully NGSS aligned. So that's some of the work that our team is doing now, taking some of these lessons that we like and trying to get them to make sure that they're NGSS aligned. And then the last thing I want to point out, the last page of all our activities is in versions of this format that we call the lab notes template, but it's really an opportunity to synthesize what the big takeaway from the activity was in the top part. So in this case, we're talking about cause and effect relationships. So asking students to describe effects and causes that they saw. But then I really want to direct you to the bottom two boxes. We'll ask students to think explicitly about how you would explain this to a different audience. We always give sort of two choices. How would you explain this relationship? In this case, we say to a third grader in a language that they would understand. And then how would you explain it to your science teacher in language that they would use? So variations on that type of theme where we're asking the students to think explicitly about expressing the same idea in different ways. We're asking them to do it in different modes, writing, drawing, peer conversation, formal write-up, but we're also asking them to think about an audience and to write for that audience. And of course, this is not something that will only help our students in science. I've argued that this is a very important science learning skill, but language arts teachers, your other colleagues, or those of you that teach multiple disciplines, this idea of thinking about your audience, understanding who your audience is, and writing to and for that audience is a really critical skill that I think a lot of students haven't had enough explicit instruction in how to do that. And then the last thing I want to show about the lesson, if you keep scrolling down, Jay, then we have what we call concept cards. And the concept cards, these have generally been student generated. We have done them bilingually in English and Spanish, although we've also done them bilingually in other languages, and we've done them trilingually. But the idea is that teachers use these over time to build a word wall, but that is meaningful for the students because they've actually helped to construct these cards. They've helped to look for the images that represent these ideas, and they've helped to think about and craft the definitions. We sometimes talk about kid-friendly definitions it's really frustrating for kids when they go look in the glossary or a dictionary for some term and the definition is more complex and confusing than the term itself. So really thinking about kid-friendly definitions, bilingual definitions, and sort of co-constructing these word cards. And I think we won't talk about general academic vocabulary, but this idea of sort of the word cards. So Jay, if you would share that back to the slides. So that's a real quick overview. And of course, normally in teacher workshops, it's way better to be able to sit and do these activities together. That's certainly, I think, the best practice for professional learning. But we're just really giving you the highlights today. So next slide, Jay. So as I was trying to point out some of the key parts in our current framework for this sort of LaCuKnoS model, some of the key parts of a lesson are the language booster. That's that kind of high interest, starting text, the investigation handout that scaffolds that multimodality, of course, needing to supply the materials, and then those concept cards, which are the big ideas to try to help kids really sort of use and take ownership of that language. And so now what we would like to do is go back briefly into the breakout rooms and have you all just sort of share back to us anything from those sort of practices or those strategies and anything that was embedded in that lesson, just sort of what does it spark for you? What ideas does it give you? What's something new you're taking away? Or what would you change? What do you already do that you think addresses some of these things? So that is the topic of our quick 5-minute, I guess, second breakout.
Yep, we're actually gonna go for 7 minutes, so we get a little bit more time in there, and you should come back automatically after 7 minutes and 15 seconds.
Awesome.
I'm gonna open up all the rooms. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had. I know that that last breakout was short, and we were in the midst of discussion. And didn't get quite to everything. But we want to be respectful of your time. So I just want to give you a couple things to think about as we go through this. This is as I said at the beginning, this is the first in of what will be a series of professional developments around multilingual learning strategies. Using and exploring these strategies, providing model lessons that can be used, especially in the virtual or hybrid formats that you're working in. So sort of next steps for us is we're going to be providing you these lessons and materials. This lesson already up on our website, I provided the link. Materials, simplistic materials are going to be being sent your way for those SMILE teachers out there. So stay involved and stay participating. This first year is really a way for us to be able to get input from teachers and use that as a starting point for the development of new lessons and the refinement of these strategies. So we can't do that without your participation. I really appreciate everybody being here today. If you think you're also going to come to the session on the 28th, don't. This session is going to be the same as the one on the 28th, and we'll keep you updated on when new sessions will be. So with that, it is 4 o'clock. If anybody does have any specific questions, please feel free to stay on and ask those questions. If you go to our website in the next couple days, you'll see a edited version of this presentation, as well as the PowerPoint presentation on our website. If you need any other information, feel free to contact the Precollege Programs email that's listed there, and that question will be given to me. So thank you again very much for attending and taking part of your day to do this, and we will be seeing you soon.
And there is a question from Cam, so hang on, Cam, if you want to ask it.
Just a general, man, in Jefferson County, we're totally distant. So I don't want to, this is kind of just personally to me and myself and Georgina. Georgina is teaching what's called CASA, CSA. And that is like our students that elected to be full homeschooled. So she's like facilitating that. They basically, our district took a teacher out of each department, and because we had enough students in our entire district that opted out of distance learning and into what they called the cost of like almost full homeschooling. And so Georgie's still around. We were kind of throwing ideas around as far as what we can do with Smile. We don't have anything in the near future as far as if we're coming back. There's nothing really been said. Our quarter actually ends in 3 weeks, and I don't even know what I'm teaching next quarter still. So we're all sorts of just figuring it out right now. So I just wanted to make sure, and just maybe even to hear from other people, how are your numbers looking? I'm kind of having a hard time getting students. I know that I can send out another mass email and get some other teachers and get some announcements sent out in the community. So I'm hoping that I can get probably around 10 to 15. But right now my number's floating around 7. And so I just, I don't know. It just, I don't want to fall out of what we're doing, but it's just this, obviously this year is pretty chaotic with that kind of thing. So I didn't know if anyone else was feeling that way. I know Georgie and myself, we just didn't want it to look like, we don't know what the heck we're doing, or we're not doing anything, and that sort of thing. So we're hoping that here, as this first quarter wraps up, everyone will kind of cool off, and then we can bring these kind of questions to our principal, because he's kind of scary right now. Anyway, I just wanted to communicate that to you, and just kind of let you know where we were. And I didn't know if anybody else was in the same boat, or if anything's different for anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I'll comment on what I've heard. Is this it's sort of, I think you're in a situation that's similar to a lot of teachers and a lot of districts that are specifically virtual, and there's not an end in sight. So how do you run what has traditionally been an after-school club that's really been dependent on social interactions between students meeting? That becomes really difficult. All the districts have the Smile contracts. They also have an addendum that we put in that sort of overrides a lot of the numbers and meeting amounts that we had put in previously, because it's not realistic that you're going to meet 25 times during the year, because what is that, a virtual meeting? How many people can have access? What sort of equity issues are we dealing with at that point? But I also think the addendum provides Smile teachers the creativity that they want to take to make meetings happen as they can within the regulations within the district.
One question that we had, because we were looking at that, and we know we can be very creative in how we're doing this, is are we able to record, let's say that if we were to, Georgie and I, we wanted to do a lesson, and what one of the things that we're having a hard time with is getting enough people to have the right time after school. I mean, just babysitting things, all that kind of whatever. And so if we were able to record meetings and then get that attendance through that, I mean, are those creative outlets that we can also have, so that if we were able to create, say, a Smile Google Classroom where we could have students come in and we could post materials in there and kind of monitor from that end, is that something that you would be willing to say okay with?
That's perfectly fine for us.
Okay.
I mean, there are some youth safety guidelines around recording students, as I'm sure that your district has been talking to you about those. And I will say that the youth safety guidelines that many districts are using are very different than those that OSU has been tasked with.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't necessarily comment on what your district will allow or wouldn't, but we definitely encourage you to use the resources within your district, like Google Classroom or Canvas if you're using that, and then and provide sort of asynchronous resources that students could potentially work on a project and then come back together for a discussion.
For synchronous,
yeah, we will be sending out a box of materials that should be going out hopefully this week that has a whole bunch of materials connected to content, and much of that content is provided online. and can be done synchronously with OSU students. So we have OSU students who normally do outreach, not necessarily with Smile, are now looking for an audience. And so we're trying to make that connection. And I'll give a plug for a lesson that's coming out from Team Talks. They're a group of graduate students from environmental toxicology who have created a lesson looking at radish seeds. And you basically take these radish seeds and you put them on paper towels. Some Smile teachers may remember this activity from a while ago, but they put a different twist on it to do a dose response curve in the high school spectrum. And then they've also scaffolded that for middle school students as well. So this is an activity that, to set up probably takes, one session. To run it, it's going to take maybe a week. Radish seeds tend to germinate pretty quickly. And then they look back and they said, okay, what's toxic, what's not? And now you can have a graduate student from Team Talks come into your session and say, let's look at your data. Let me show you, what I would do with the data and how I can interpret it. So as those things become available, they're on our website. And can people see what I'm sharing here?
Yep.
This is something where we have these STEM at home each week, and we have a number of these, and they may not work for everybody, but hopefully they work for some people. And Smile teachers are, these are really meant for Smile teachers, but we have a number of them already listed in here. And these are, so your students, you could provide them these resources, and your students can go to these sessions if they choose to, or as part of the Smile Club, and do these activities. And these activities are very low resource or no resource activities. And then we will be supporting extra activities specific for Smile based on materials that get sent to you. We also have created a public Canvas site that has our iInvent or our invention-focused curriculum. This is a curriculum that where we've done in-person camps. We've done a number in Madras, or 3 in Madras, over the years. So, but it's sort of project-based where students are working on an invention, and that can be facilitated by students. And there's opportunities to work with us. So say you're like, okay, I know I can get my students here at a particular time. Contact me and we may be able to set up a custom version of that where we set up a 3-week period where we have OSU students doing check-ins and running activities with students. I know in your area, we're running one with Crook County Middle School.
Okay.
Based on a Facebook grant from that data center there.
Yeah.
So there's opportunities, and I'm definitely willing to discuss further about what we can do to meet the needs of your Smile Club. But I know it's going to be tough this year, and I think our hope is that we can keep things moving along and keep participation at the highest level we can, not only among students but teachers and schools, so that we can come back strong when we are in face-to-face education.
Yeah, we're really trying to motivate our middle school, especially the K-8, to get back into the Smile, and so yeah, and so it makes, I really appreciate you saying that. And yeah, we want to do is exactly as much as we can. I just wanted to, this is only my 2nd year into the Smile thing, so I just wanted to make sure that I was, keeping up our end of that contract and stuff as well. So thank you everyone for just entertaining my monopolization of that conversation, and thank you Jay and everyone else for your time. I really do appreciate it. So we're all trying.
And the last thing I'll say is we are trying to get creative at Warm Springs. So we are working with OSU Open Campus, and we'll hopefully have maybe not a teacher, but somebody that's going to come in and run Smile Club, so we can be funneling students from Warm Springs to the high school, because I know that's just been a challenging school for the last couple of years. Yeah. No, very much appreciated. Thank you. Yep. All right. Cheers, everybody. Hey, and thank you, Ken. Appreciate that.
Thanks, everybody. I've actually got to run.
Thank you very much, Corey.
Yeah. So we'll debrief it, but I think we're in good shape.
Okay.
All right.
Bye now.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Barbara.
You're welcome.